The most feared man in Seoul walked through his own front door, and the woman who saved his life was the one he'd never bothered to learn the name of. When the Korean Mafia boss came home early and the black maid whispered, "Stay silent. The reason will shatter everything you think you know about loyalty." Kang Jin-young didn't just own buildings in Seoul. He owned the silence that followed his name. Prosecutors buried files. Rivals vanished into the Han River. His penthouse, 60 floors above the chaos he orchestrated, was a fortress where even the air knew better than to move without permission. Tonight he wasn't supposed to breathe it. His private jet had gone down 2 hours ago. At least, that's what the news was reporting. Mechanical failure. All souls lost. But Kang hated flying, and his last-minute switch to the train had turned an assassination into an inconvenience. He stepped off the private elevator, Chilsung ink visible beneath his rolled sleeves, and felt it immediately. The apartment was too quiet. Not peaceful. Predatory. He moved toward the living room, ready to pour himself whiskey and plan his retaliation. Then a hand, not rough but deliberate, caught his wrist and yanked him backward into shadow. He looked down into the face of Tracy Jones, the housemaid, the woman he passed every morning without eye contact. Her hand didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't lower. She pressed one finger to her lips and spoke the words that would flip his empire upside down. "Stay silent. They're toasting to your funeral in there. Hooray! Today is my birthday and I want one birthday gift from you. Like, subscribe and engage this channel. This is the one wish I have for today." Now before we begin this story, understand this. What you're about to hear isn't just a crime story. It's a reckoning. A man who ruled Seoul through fear and silence. A woman the world trained itself not to see. And one whispered warning that turned power inside out. This is a story about loyalty mistaken for obedience. About control confused with strength. And about how the people we overlook often decide who lives and who doesn't. Now, if you've been watching stories like this and haven't subscribed yet, no pressure. But if somewhere in this story, your jaw tightens, your pulse speeds up, or you realize you've been holding your breath, then tap subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because stories like this, they don't fade when the screen goes dark. Alright, let me show you what happens when the most feared man in Seoul finally listens to the quietest voice in the room. Kang Jin-young had walked through blood and fire to build his empire, but nothing had prepared him for the wrongness of his own home. The penthouse stretched before him like a mausoleum. Marble floors gleaming under recessed lighting, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing Seoul's glittering sprawl like a painting he'd paid for in other men's lives. Everything was exactly where it should be. Except the people. The guards were gone. Not off duty. Not rotated. Gone. The 2 men who should have been flanking the elevator, the one who monitored the hallway cameras, the night shift enforcer who always smelled like cigarettes and expensive cologne, all of them had evaporated like steam. Kang's hand drifted instinctively toward his hip, but he'd left his gun in Busan. A mistake. The kind soft men made. He moved deeper into the apartment, his Italian leather shoes silent against the stone. The air tasted metallic, like the moment before a thunderstorm. No music from Sylvia's room. No murmur of the television. Just the hum of the city below, 60 floors removed from consequence. Then she appeared. Tracy Jones materialized from the service corridor like a ghost he'd never bothered to acknowledge. He'd seen her 1,000 times, folding linens, polishing glass, existing in that peripheral space where servants lived. He didn't know her last name, didn't know if she had family. She was furniture that moved. But now she was standing directly in his path, and everything about her was wrong. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes were wild. Her hands, those hands that had scrubbed his floors, were balled into fists. She didn't bow, didn't step aside, didn't apologize for breathing his air. Instead, she moved with startling speed, closing the distance between them and grabbing his forearm with a grip that shocked him. Not because it hurt, but because it was deliberate. She pulled him backward, into the shadow of a marble column, her body angled like she was shielding him from sniper fire. Her voice came out low, urgent, barely more than a breath. "Don't move. Don't speak. They think you're dead. And if they see you, you will be." Kong stared at her. At this woman he'd never truly seen. And for the first time in 20 years he obeyed someone. Tracy didn't wait for questions. She pulled Kong through a door he'd never noticed. A narrow passage behind the kitchen where the help moved like shadows between rooms. The walls were bare concrete, lit by a single fluorescent strip that buzzed like a dying insect. This was the architecture of invisibility, the veins of his fortress he'd never thought to see. She pressed him against the cold wall and pointed through a gap in the decorative screen that separated the servants' corridor from the living room. Kong leaned forward and his entire world collapsed. Sylvia sat on his leather sofa, legs crossed, champagne flute catching the light. She wore the black dress he'd bought her in Milan, the one that cost more than most men earned in a year. Her hair was pinned up, exposing the diamond necklace he'd given her on their anniversary. She looked like a widow. She looked radiant. Across from her, Minho, his lieutenant, his brother in all but blood, loosened his tie and poured himself a second glass. The Armand de Brignac. The bottle Kong had been saving for the Shanghai deal. "To mechanical failures," Sylvia said, raising her glass. Minho grinned. "To convenient timing." They clinked crystal, and the sound cut through Kong like a blade. He watched Minho lean back, utterly relaxed, utterly confident. On the coffee table between them, next to the champagne bucket, sat a Glock 19. Casual. Accessible. Loaded, undoubtedly. Kang's hand moved instinctively to his waistband. Empty. He'd been so certain of his safety, so arrogant in his power, that he'd walked into his own execution unarmed. His entire security apparatus had been rotted from the inside, and he hadn't seen it, hadn't wanted to see it. "The old man's accounts transfer tonight," Minho said, swirling his champagne. "By morning, the Chilsung Syndicate answers to me." "Us," Sylvia corrected, her voice sharp as a stiletto. Minho's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Us." Kong felt Tracy's hand on his shoulder, steadying him, or maybe restraining him. He wanted to burst through that screen, to wrap his tattooed hands around Minho's throat and watch the light leave his eyes. But the gun was closer to them than to him. And he was a dead man with no weapon, no guards, no leverage. Just a maid who'd chosen not to let him die. Tracy's fingers closed around Kang's wrist again, pulling him away from the screen before rage could override survival instinct. She moved through the servants' corridor with the confidence of someone who'd mapped every shadow, every hidden passage in this glass tower. Kong followed, his mind still trapped in that living room, replaying the toast, the casual way Minho had reached for his champagne. They emerged near the main elevator bank. Tracy jabbed the call button. Nothing. She tried again, pressing harder, as if force could override the digital lockdown. The panel stayed dark, unresponsive. "They've sealed the building," she whispered. "Biometric override. Only Minho's fingerprint works now." Kong stared at the elevator that had carried him to this penthouse 1,000 times. His kingdom had been reprogrammed in his absence. Every entrance, every exit, every breath of security he designed, now a cage. "This way." Tracy pulled him back into the shadows, toward a section of wall that looked solid until she pressed a recessed panel. A door clicked open, revealing a cramped service elevator that reeked of cleaning solution and old grease. The kind of space Kong had never acknowledged existed. They stepped inside just as footsteps echoed in the main corridor. Heavy, purposeful. One of Minho's men making rounds. Tracy yanked the door shut, her hand hovering over the button panel, not pressing anything yet. The elevator was old enough to groan when it moved, loud enough to alert anyone listening. Through the crack in the door, Kong saw him. Park, the enforcer he'd personally promoted last year. The man walked past, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones. No sign of anyone. Building's clean. Yeah, the bodies probably scattered across the East Sea by now. Park laughed. Actually laughed. The footsteps faded. Tracy counted to 10 under her breath, then pressed the button for the parking garage. The elevator shuddered to life with a mechanical whine that sounded like a scream in the silence. Kong watched the floor numbers descend, 60, 59, 58, each one taking him further from everything he'd built, everything he'd believed was unshakable. Tracy stood beside him, still wearing her maid's uniform, her jaw set like a soldier's. How long have you known? He asked. 3 days, she said. I was trying to figure out how to warn you without getting us both killed. The parking garage smelled like concrete and exhaust. A subterranean cathedral dedicated to machines Kong collected like trophies. The elevator doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, and he stepped into his private section, 12 vehicles, each worth more than most Seoul apartments. The Bentley, the Mercedes G-Wagon, the vintage Porsche he'd taken from a debtor who'd bet everything and lost. Every single one had been boxed in by black SUVs. Not random parking. Strategic blockade. The SUVs formed a wall of steel and tinted glass, bumpers kissing bumpers, ensuring nothing in Kang's collection could move without a forklift. Someone had thought this through. Someone who knew he'd run. They're probably rigged anyway, Tracy said, already moving past the luxury graveyard. C4 under the chassis, maybe a pressure switch on the driver's seat. Minho's thorough. Kong followed her deeper into the garage, past the executive spaces into the service area where delivery trucks and maintenance vehicles hibernated. She stopped in front of a battered white van with faded logos for a laundry service that had gone bankrupt 2 years ago. Rust bloomed around the wheel wells. One headlight was cracked. Tracy dropped to her knees beside the driver's door, pulled a bobby pin from her hair, and went to work on the lock. It clicked open in 4 seconds. Get in, she said, sliding behind the wheel. Kong climbed into the passenger seat, watching as she ripped open the steering column casing with her bare hands. Wires spilled out like intestines. She sorted through them with the speed of someone who'd done this in the dark, in the rain, under pressure. Red wire to black. A twist. A spark. The engine coughed to life, rattling like an old man's lungs. Courier work, she said, catching his stare. Before I needed to disappear. You learn things when you're delivering packages people don't want traced. She threw the van into gear and aimed it toward the exit ramp. No hesitation. No fear. Just clean professional execution. Kong had built an empire on reading people, on seeing their weaknesses before they became threats. And he'd looked at this woman every morning for 2 years and seen nothing. Furniture. Wallpaper. Background noise. What else don't I know about you? He asked. Tracy accelerated into the Seoul night, rain starting to streak the windshield. Everything, she said. The rain came down in sheets, turning Seoul's neon into watercolor smears across the windshield. Tracy drove like she'd memorized the city's rhythm, cutting through alleys, avoiding main roads, navigating the arterial backstreets where CCTV cameras had blind spots. Kong watched the city he owned slip past like a stranger's dream. His phone vibrated. Once, twice, then continuously. A swarm of notifications that lit up the screen like a panic attack. He pulled it from his pocket and watched his empire turn against him in real time. Messages from lieutenants he'd trusted. Alerts from businesses he controlled. All of them with the same directive, the same words that made his blood turn to ice. The boss is alive. Find him. The girl too. 50 million won for proof of location. Minho had found out. Somehow security footage or a patrolling guard or just the wrong person seeing the service elevator descend. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that Kong Jin-young, the man who'd never run from anything, was now the most hunted target in the city he'd once ruled. They've weaponized the whole network, he said, voice hollow. Every street soldier, every informant, every business owner who owes me protection money, they're all looking for us now. Tracy didn't flinch. How much? 50 million. She whistled low. I'm worth more than I thought. Kong couldn't find the humor. He stared at his phone, at the messages still flooding in, and felt something crack inside him. 20 years. 20 years of building the Chilsung Syndicate from a street gang into an empire. He'd broken men for smaller betrayals. He'd drowned rivals for disrespect. And his wife, the woman he'd married in a cathedral, the woman whose family he'd absorbed into his organization, had sold him for ambition and champagne. I gave Minho everything, he said quietly. Pulled him out of a gambling debt that would have gotten him killed. Taught him the business. Stood as godfather to his daughter. And he waited for the perfect moment to take it all, Tracy replied, eyes fixed on the road. That's what ambitious men do. They wait. Kong looked at her. This woman in a maid's uniform who'd saved his life, who was now driving him through a city that wanted them dead. Why did you help me? Tracy was silent for 3 blocks. Then, because I've been invisible my whole life. And I'm tired of watching powerful men get exactly what they deserve, nothing. Tracy navigated the van into Gwangmyeong, a neighborhood where Kang's protection money flowed upward, but his presence never descended. The streets narrowed into a maze of cramped shops and aging apartment blocks, the kind of place where grandmothers sold vegetables from plastic crates and men smoked on stoops, watching everything, saying nothing. She parked in an alley behind a shuttered restaurant and led Kong down a flight of concrete stairs slick with rain. The basement door had 3 deadbolts. She opened them all with keys that appeared from somewhere in her uniform, and they stepped into a space that smelled like mildew and old concrete. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, camping cot in the corner, bottled water stacked against the wall, a hot plate with 2 dented pots. This wasn't a safe house. It was a survivalist bunker, assembled by someone who'd learned to expect the worst. Welcome to the invisible city, Tracy said, locking the door behind them. The one you own but never see. Kong stood in the center of the cramped space, his Italian suit absurdly out of place. He'd slept in penthouses and 5-star hotels. He'd conducted business in private clubs where membership cost more than cars. And now he was in a basement that probably flooded when it rained hard enough. Tracy ignited the hot plate and pulled 2 packages of ramen from a plastic bin. The cheap kind, the kind college students lived on. She cracked eggs into the boiling water without asking if he wanted any, moving with the efficiency of someone used to cooking for one. Sit, she said, nodding at the cot. He sat, watched her stir the noodles, add seasoning from crinkled packets. She divided the ramen into 2 chipped bowls and handed him one with wooden chopsticks that had been washed so many times the lacquer had worn off. Kong couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something that didn't come on white tablecloths. He took a bite. It was scalding, oversalted, perfect. I've extorted half the businesses in this neighborhood, he said. And I've never set foot here. Tracy slurped her noodles unfazed. That's how power works. You take from people you don't have to see. Makes it easier. He looked at her across the steam rising from their bowls. A mafia boss and a maid, sharing 20-cent noodles in a basement while the city hunted them. I saw you, he said quietly. Every day for 2 years, and I never actually saw you. Tracy met his eyes. Yeah, I know. They finished the ramen in silence, the kind that felt less awkward than necessary. Kong set his empty bowl aside and finally voiced the problem they'd both been avoiding. I need a gun. Tracy nodded, like she'd been waiting for him to reach that conclusion. You've got stashes all over the city. Emergency caches. I've cleaned your office enough times to see the maps you thought you'd hidden. Kong felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with being hunted. Where's the nearest one? 81. Above the Noribang on Useda Naro. The one with the broken neon sign. She stood, already moving toward the door. I'll go. Alone. You're the most recognizable man in Seoul right now. Your face is worth 50 million won. Mine. She gestured at her uniform. I'm every maid, every delivery girl, every woman people look through instead of at. I can move. You can't. The logic was bulletproof, but Kang's instincts screamed against it. You could disappear. Take whatever's in that cash and vanish. New identity, new city. 50 kilograms of unregistered firearms is worth more than I'm paying you to scrub floors. Tracy pulled her hair into a tighter ponytail, checked the deadbolts. Yeah, I could. So why won't you? She turned, and for the first time since she'd grabbed his wrist in the penthouse, she smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who'd made a choice and accepted the consequences. Because men like Min-ho have been stepping on people like me our entire lives. Taking what we build, claiming what we earn, erasing us when we're no longer useful. She opened the door, rain misting in from the stairwell. I'm tired of being erased. And watching you take back what's yours? That's not your redemption story, boss. It's mine. She was gone before he could respond, the door closing with a metallic click that echoed in the tiny basement. Kang sat alone in the silence, surrounded by bottled water and camping supplies, wearing a suit that cost more than this entire building. He'd spent 20 years commanding loyalty through fear, through money, through the gravitational pull of power. And the only person who'd stayed when it mattered was the one he'd never bothered to see. He checked his phone. No messages from Tracy, just his entire organization still hunting them both. Tracy returned 90 minutes later with a duffel bag that clinked when she set it down. Inside, 2 Glocks, a .357 revolver, ammunition, and a combat knife that still had dried blood on the handle. Kang didn't ask whose blood. He checked the Glock's magazine, chambered around, and finally felt like himself again. Now we need leverage, he said. Min-ho's consolidated too fast. We can't fight the entire syndicate head-on. Tracy leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So what's the play? Kang pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts he hadn't touched in years. He stopped on a name that made his jaw tighten, Choi Dae-young, the Serpent, leader of the Buchan faction, the rival organization Kang had spent a decade containing, undermining, bleeding dry through strategic warfare that never quite erupted into open violence. He dialed. Choi answered on the 3rd ring. I heard you died, Jin-young. Pity. I was planning to send flowers. I need a favor. Choi laughed, a sound like grinding metal. The great Kang Jin-young needs me? What's it worth? 81 territory. 3 blocks. Yours free and clear. If you create enough noise tonight to pull Min-ho's attention south. Silence. Then, you're offering me land you don't control anymore. I'll control it again by sunrise. Or you can wait and negotiate with Min-ho, who's already planning to push into Gangnam. Your choice. Choi was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Where and when? Hongdae. Midnight. Make it loud. Kang ended the call. Tracy was already moving, grabbing the duffel, checking her watch. If we're using Choi as bait, we need to be ready to move the second Min-ho commits his enforcers. They loaded into the van, Tracy behind the wheel again, Kang riding shotgun with a Glock on his lap. The plan was surgical. Wait for the distraction, then hit Min-ho's command center while he was scrambling to contain Choi's provocation. But at 12:17 a.m., Kang's phone lit up with a message that turned the night inside out. We have your courier girl's sister. Wholesale market. Come alone or she bleeds. Tracy saw his face. What? They have leverage on you. Your sister. Her knuckles went white on the steering wheel. I don't have a sister. The phone buzzed again. A photo. A woman bound and gagged, terror in her eyes. Then who the hell is that? Kang asked. Tracy's voice went flat. A lie. They're flushing us toward a kill zone. She yanked the wheel hard, tires screaming, and the van hurtled toward the industrial district. The industrial district was a graveyard of steel and rust, shipping containers stacked like a brutalist monument to global commerce. Tracy killed the headlights and coasted the van between rows of 40-foot containers, rain hammering the roof like automatic gunfire. The whole area was a maze designed for logistics, not escape. "They'll box us in," Kong said, scanning the shadows. "Snipers on high ground, ground team pushing through the corridors. Then we don't stay together." Tracy grabbed the combat knife from the duffel. "You're lethal. I'm invisible. We use what we're good at." Before Kong could argue, headlights swept across the rear window. 3 vehicles, maybe 4, closing fast. Tracy shoved the van into park, grabbed a metal thermos from the floor, and kicked open her door. 10 minutes, she said. Then we meet at the east gate. She vanished into the rain before he could stop her. Kong moved in the opposite direction, Glock raised, using the containers as cover. The rain was a curtain of noise that worked both ways. He couldn't hear them, but they couldn't hear him either. He rounded a corner and found 2 of Minho's enforcers sweeping the corridor with tactical flashlights. He fired twice. Center mass, no hesitation. They dropped without a sound louder than the rain. Somewhere in the maze, metal clanged against metal. Then again. A rhythm. Tracy was creating noise, drawing attention, moving through the industrial landscape like it was designed for her. Kong heard shouting, boots on wet concrete, men chasing shadows. He advanced through the kill zone methodically, every corner a potential ambush, every shadow a threat. Another enforcer appeared from between containers. Kong put 2 rounds in his chest before the man could raise his weapon. The body collapsed into a puddle reflecting sodium lights. A gunshot cracked from the north. Then another. Someone was shooting at movement, at noise, at nothing. Tracy was conducting them like an orchestra, making them waste ammunition on ghosts while Kong carved through their flanks. He found her at the east gate, rain-soaked, breathing hard, the thermos dented from where she'd used it to bang on containers. She had a split lip and someone else's blood on her collar, but her eyes were sharp, alive. "For down on my side," she said. 5 on mine. Behind them, the maze of containers echoed with confused shouting. The hit squad was collapsing inward, hunting phantoms. "Now what?" Tracy asked. Kong checked his ammunition. 1 magazine left. "Now we stop running." Minho was waiting in the center of the shipping yard, standing beneath a crane's floodlight like an actor claiming center stage. He'd shed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and held a gun loosely at his side. Not aimed but ready. Behind him, Sylvia stood under an umbrella held by a nervous bodyguard, her designer heels sinking into the mud. Kong stepped into the light, Tracy flanking him 3 paces back. The rain had soaked through his shirt, plastering it to his skin, revealing the full canvas of Chilsung ink that covered his chest and arms. "I have to admit," Minho called out, "I'm impressed. Most dead men stay dead." "Most brothers don't toast over corpses," Kong replied. Minho's smile evaporated. "You were dying anyway. Old ways, old rules, old blood. I was just accelerating the inevitable. By sleeping with my wife?" Sylvia flinched but didn't speak. Minho raised the gun. Kong raised his. 2 men who'd fought side by side for a decade, now aimed at each other's hearts across 20 feet of rain-slicked concrete. "Drop it," Minho said. "You've lost. The syndicate is mine. The accounts, the territories, the respect." Kong fired. Not at Minho. At the floodlight. The bulb exploded, plunging them into darkness broken only by distant street lamps. Minho's shot went wild, sparking off a container. Kong closed the distance in 4 strides, catching Minho's wrist and twisting until the gun clattered to the ground. They collided like freight trains. No technique now, just violence. Kong drove his knee into Minho's ribs, felt something crack. Minho responded with an elbow to Kang's jaw that filled his mouth with copper. They grappled, slipped in the mud, crashed into the side of a container. "Jin Young, wait." Sylvia's voice desperate now. "We can negotiate. Split everything. I'll testify that Minho forced me." Kong slammed Minho's head against the steel once, twice, until the lieutenant went limp. He turned to his wife, rain washing the blood from his knuckles. You wore the dress I bought you. To celebrate my death. Sylvia's umbrella trembled. In the distance, police sirens wailed, growing closer. Someone had called them. Maybe Choi. Maybe Tracy. Kong looked at the woman he'd married, the man he'd trusted, and felt nothing but the cold. Run, he said. Before I changed my mind. They ran. Tracy stepped out of the shadows, watching them disappear. You're letting them go? The city will eat them alive, Kong said. That's worse than a bullet. 6 months later, the penthouse looked like it had been exorcised. New furniture. New art. The blood-soaked memories replaced with clean lines and open space. The floor-to-ceiling windows still framed Seoul in neon and glass, but the view felt different now, earned rather than inherited. Tracy stood at the window in a charcoal suit tailored to conceal the knife she wore at her hip. Her hair was shorter now, professional, the kind of cut that said she had places to be and people who answered to her. She wasn't holding a mop or folding linens. She was watching the city the way Kong had taught her, not as a collection of buildings, but as a living organism of power and debt. Kong approached from the bar, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. Yamazaki 18. The real thing, not the counterfeit bottles his lieutenants used to skim profit. He handed one to Tracy without ceremony. Choi's pushing into Gangbuk, she said, not turning from the window. Testing our response time. Let him push. We'll take it back in 3 weeks when his supply lines are overextended. Kong stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You were right about the Itaewon territory. Giving it up bought us 6 months of peace we needed. Tracy sipped her whiskey, let the burn settle. Minho would have held it out of pride and bled resources. You held it out of tradition. I gave it up because I don't care about either. Below them, the city moved through its midnight rhythms. Deals in backrooms. Money changing hands. Power shifting like tides. The Chilsung Syndicate had survived its civil war. Restructured, adapted. The old guard who'd stood with Minho had been quietly removed. New blood filled the ranks. People who'd earned their positions, not inherited them. Sylvia's in Bangkok, Tracy said. Working as a hostess in a bar that caters to tourists. I know. You keeping tabs or letting go? Kong drained his glass. I'm remembering. There's a difference. Tracy finally turned from the window, met his eyes. 6 months ago she'd been furniture. Invisible. Now she stood at the center of his empire, his strategist, his conscience, his equal. The city doesn't sleep, Kong said. Tracy smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes but meant something deeper. Good. Neither do we. They stood together in the silence, 2 people who'd saved each other, watching their kingdom breathe. Sometimes the people the world calls invisible are the only ones who see the truth clearly enough to change the fate of everyone standing in the light. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. That proves humanity doesn't disappear in darkness. It waits to be noticed. Your subscription and engagement is my birthday gift, and it is cherished way more than you can ever imagine.